Hey guys, so it's round 3 of the World Cup and 6 Indian players are remaining in the event right now. And round 3, day 1 has just ended. We've had some fascinating games, including the one between two Indians, Vidit and Adhiban. So let's look at the games and see who took the lead in day 1 of round 3. The most exciting game is the one between Vidit and Adhiban, and this game was one of the first games to finish among the Indian players. And clearly, this was a very dynamic battle where both players really wanted to win. They have a really good friendship, but over the board, they were pretty serious. And we'll try to look at this, what happened in the game. So here, first of all, Vidit, of course, was going to go for d4 because he really does not want to risk playing 1e4 against Adhiban, who really thrives on some dynamic positions. So knight f6, c4, g6, and Adhiban already playing g6, not really trying to go for the main lines of Catalan against Vidit. So g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, castles, knight c3, d6, knight f3, and we have the fianchetto king's Indian now, which is supposed to be safe for white because the bishop is on g2. It's not so easy for black to start attacking on the king side, so white is considered to be just slightly better in these positions. So knight c6, castles, a6, bishop f4, rook b8, and black is of course putting the rook away from this diagonal where white's bishop can actually put some influence. So rook c1, h6, d5, and now here the excellent move e5, equalizing the game immediately. So bishop d2, knight d4, knight e1. An excellent idea, not trying to exchange the pieces, trying to push the knight back so that now white can push away the knight with e3, and as of now the knight does not really have a great square to go to. It will have to go back, eventually being kicked out from there again, most probably back to e7. So now c5 takes, e3, knight e6, bishop c6, and white has technically won a pawn, but black will immediately win it back with rook takes b2. And if there was a way for white to place this bishop magically on b3, then the rook would be trapped, but as of now, it's not possible. So knight e3, rook b8, bishop g2, h5, knight d5, taking the center, bishop b7, bishop c3, opposing the strong bishop on g7. And now after e4, bishop takes f6, an excellent move. Here, of course, black should have played something else. For example, a move like h4 comes to mind, trying to nibble away at the white king side little by little. As we know, the h-pawn does not really weaken black's king at all. But after e4, which was a clear mistake in this position, they played the best move, bishop takes f6, and now bishop takes e4. And it's not really clear what compensation Adhiban really saw here, but as of now, it looks like white is just clearly better here. So h4, rook b1, bishop g7, bishop g2, rook e8, and both sides are trying to stabilize, but the extra pawn will count in these positions. So queen g4, h takes, queen a5, trying to put some pressure. Well, black has to do something. So rook b3, and a very clever move. So for example, if you capture queen takes a2, now what do you think white plays? White plays the move rook fb1, and suddenly there are some deadly pins along the b file. So that's why black cannot capture on a2, so bishop takes d5, and now this bishop is a monster. Even though they are opposite color bishops, this bishop on g7 cannot do anything in this position, while the bishop on d5 rules the board. So knight c7, black is trying to exchange his strong bishop. Bishop c6, white says no, you cannot. And after rook takes b3, a takes b3, white's pawn structure is also stabilized now. So rook b8, b4, queen a3, rook d1, queen b3, bishop f3, and stabilizing the position finally. Now I don't see how black can create any serious counterplay in this position, and Vidit should win comfortably. So after queen c2, king g2, bishop f8, queen d4, and now you can see the queen controls this very important diagonal. In fact, rook h1, rook h8 is mate here, so that tells you when there's a mating to thread in the position that something is probably going correct in white's position. So knight e6 immediately, queen a7, rook e8, queen takes a6, white has won another pawn, knight g5, trying some tactical ideas. If the king has to come out, well, who knows, there might be some devastating checks, especially when the rook is defended by the bishop. So that's why knight e1, excellent move, attacking the queen, defending the bishop. And after queen f5, queen c6, rook e5, knight d3, now it's all about the passed pawns. The king side has stabilized, and I don't see how black can create any counterplay, especially because the bishop on f8 is a dud. And after rook e8, queen d5, queen h3, king g1, bishop h6, simply knight f4, pushing the queen back, queen c8, and now bishop to g2. And here Adhiban resigned because there's absolutely nothing he can do in this position. The p pawn will simply rush to b7, forever defended by the bishop on g2, and it's time Adhiban resigned. Of course, knight takes g6 is also a threat here, and that means Vidit has a lead of 1-0 in the third round. This clash was kind of fortunate or unfortunate based on how you look at it. This guarantees that at least one Indian will head off to round 4, but it also means that one will be eliminated for sure. And so far, Vidit looks like the guy. He might just push through, although Adhiban has played really well in the previous game, so let's see how it goes. Let's move on to the next game, where India's top seed is Harikrishna, and he was playing Lupulescu today from Romania. He started with 1e4, c5, knight f3, d6, and then he went for bishop b5, which is not really the main line of knight off, but well, if you are really not feeling like battling it out in opening theory, this is a good weapon for white. c4, a6 takes, and knight takes. This is less common than queen takes d7, but still very, very decent for black. And after knight c3, knight f6, castles, e6, h3, bishop e7, d3, all opening moves are very solid for both sides. No side has a clear advantage. I think it's just about the middle game and how people maneuver their pieces, I think now. So castles a3, rook b8, b4, b5, both sides trying to gain space on the queen side with b4 and b5. Let's see which side succeeds. B takes c5, knight takes c5, c takes b5, a takes b5. And now here, knight to d4, attacking the b5 pawn. It's not so easy to defend. And black played queen d7. And after rook b1, I don't really see how black can sufficiently defend this pawn. So after rook fc8, bishop e3, e5, white went ahead and captured on b5. So now d5, so this was black's idea to kind of break through in the center, and because knight on b5 is hanging, white does not have the option of capturing twice on d5. So here bishop takes e5 was played. He has to capture this. And after rook takes c5, a4, defending the weak knight which was attacked, I think white has stabilized a little bit, even though I think black here definitely has compensation. It's not the same as Adhiban's bishop. This bishop can really create havoc into the position. It can sit on d4 or c5, and it can put a lot of pressure on f2, but still white should be slightly better with the extra pawn, and it's on black to somehow find the counterplay. When you have a choice between getting an extra pawn and having a position where you have to find some very difficult moves to create the counterplay, it's much better to have the extra pawn. And after rook c8, queen b3, bishop d8, the bishop is trying to go to greener pastures, but this pawn might just be enough for white to win. After rook d1, bishop a5, knight d5, knight takes, pawn takes, and here after rook takes d5, knight to a3. So white has basically rerouted his pieces in a way where knight will eventually go to c4. It will support the pawn all the way to a5, and then slowly he will use his major pieces to support the pawns. So after rook c3, queen takes c3, an excellent move. Simple tactics, of course, but you have to notice this under time pressure. Bishop takes c3, now rook to b8, and black will also lose his queen for the rook. So rook queen d8, rook takes, and after king f1, the king is coming to the center, the knight is excellently placed, and the extra a pawn will decide the game. So rook a8, knight b5, attacking the bishop, so this cannot be captured. Bishop a5, rook c1, bishop b4, rook b1, bishop a5, knight a7. Another excellent move to simply get the knight to a better square. And after bishop c7, rook b7, bishop d6, a5, g6, knight c6. Again, the back rank does not really help black, and the a pawn is going forward. Rook c8, knight e7, takes. And in this case, with, for example, the active rook on e7, if the rook was, for example, on a7 and the black rook was somewhere on a2, this would be altogether different story. I think the rook will be behind the passed pawn, but in this position the rook is perfectly placed and the black rook really is not really actively placed right now. So rook c5, a6, rook a5 and a7, and now you can see if the rook was on a8 it would be a different story, but in this position white is simply winning because the king can come up close to the pawn and decide the game. And after king g7, king e2, the king is coming, bishop b7, rook a2, king d1, h5, and black cannot even capture any of these pawns. The pawn is already on a7. So king c1, king e6, king b1, rook a5, and the king will come up the board now. First it goes to the left and now to straight up towards the pawn. So f6, king c3, rook a1, king c4, king d6. So the black king is trying to shoulder away the white king, but because he also has a lot of weaknesses on the king side, white has plenty of ways. He can sometimes try to simply attack and win a couple of these pawns. Even if he managed to win like 1 or 2 pawns on the king side at the cost of this pawn, it will still be completely winning for white. So that's why this is completely lost for black. And now rook f7, exactly what Harikrishna plays. And in this position, Black simply resigned because the only move I see to hold on to the position is king e6. And now you can simply play the move rook g7. And now if the king goes here, you capture on g6. And if the king does not come to stop the white king, you can simply bring the king to b5, b6 and queen your pawn. And black does not have the time to even capture any of white's pawns on the king side. And that's why his opponent resigned. And that means Harikrishna has a 1-0 lead. And he is favorite to qualify for the next round as well. And next, we will look at Nihal Sarin's game. Nihal Sarin had the white pieces against his stronger opponent, Dmitry Andreikin, who has literally been the finalist of the World Cup a few years back. So it was a tough competition from him from the start, but he can pull through this. So let's see what happened in the game. After b3, b6, so Nihal starts with the move b3 and Andreikin trolls him with the move b6. This is kind of psychological ploy as well. Of course, black would have taken the center with a move like e5 or even a move like d5, but he is trying to troll Nihal as well. Both are trying to troll each other in a way. And after e4, bishop b7, knight c3. So Nihal takes the center now, e6, bishop b2, knight f6, e5, knight e4, takes, and h4. So Nihal is trying to play in a structure similar to the French, where the queen will probably come out on g4 or h5. He will try to push the h-pawn, castle queen side, and try to attack black on the king side. So c5, queen g4, bishop b7, h5, knight c6, castles, a6, and knight f3. So both sides are trying to improve their pieces, but the main question is, how does black castle? That's the major question here. If he can somehow manage to make his king safe, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with this position, especially because as of now, this bishop is blocked by the pawn. It's another story if the knight could somehow go here, here, and here to d6. That would completely change the evaluation. And probably that's why black plays h6, king b1, b5. So black is trying to expand on the queen side where white's king is laying out. So after d4, takes, queen g5, trying to exchange queens, queen e4, queen e5, takes, and knight takes e6. So a simple tactic just to recover the pawn back. And this endgame looks slightly better for white, I think, because black's king is still in the center. This pawn is kind of gaining some space. It can, of course, be weak in the endgame, but as of now, I think this bishop cannot be developed. So white should have the slight edge here. So f6, bishop, well, this was a necessity. He has to develop his pieces somehow. Bishop b2, bishop c5, and that's why I thought maybe bishop b2 was not the best move when I saw this. F2 is the clear weakness. And after bishop b2, bishop c5, then suddenly black's pieces do not feel so bad suddenly. And in a couple of moves, the position has changed. So I think maybe there was a better move here. What I thought was probably bishop d4, preventing bishop c5 as a better move. It also has a drawback that black can simply castle. A surprising move, of course, but this is probably just equal, I think. Even this should be better than what Nihal actually played, bishop b2, but of course it is still probably just equal. So f3, the move we expected, king e7, c4, b4, and now Nihal already has a protected passed pawn. So if, for example, I magically eliminate all these pieces from the board, I think Nihal would be pretty happy from his position, but that's not the case yet. So bishop d3, rook a d8, bishop g6, rook takes, rook here, takes. And to be honest, in this position, I'm sure each side expected the game to end in a draw. It's just two bishops each, no knights, which are kind of tricky pieces. So I think if Nihal had offered a draw here, Andreikin would have probably taken it. I cannot see Andreikin rejecting a draw here. This just feels like it's dead equal. And after king c2, king e7, king d3, bishop c6, bishop d4, king d6. And now he took on c5. Now this is the problem. Guys, I think this was just a matter of being under time pressure maybe, and also playing this strong tournament for so many days, trying to come up with the best moves each and every time, that he made this positional mistake, bishop takes c5. You have pawns on the light squares. I think when you know this, all your pawns on the light squares, your good bishop is this one. You do not want to exchange this bishop on the dark square bishop on d4. Any move, literally even a move like bishop b2 going back, maintaining the same structure, the same configuration of pieces, would have been excellent for Nihal. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this position here. But he exchanged, which was a clear mistake, and now suddenly black has some chances only because he has a light square bishop and his pawns are mostly on the dark squares. This will also go to a5, this will go to e5, and after king e3, a5, g4, a4, bishop e4, bishop e8, bishop g6. Nihal is trying to take the draw here, but now maybe Enrique is trying to push, and he moves this pawn move a3. This is also very threatening because sometimes bishop a4 and bishop takes b3 can be a threat, so white always has to keep his bishop close to the pawn on b3. And now bishop c2, f5, bishop b1, and this is where Nihal blundered basically. He should have probably just captured on f5, and after e takes f5, f4, and because this pawn is locked on a light square, this is a dead drawn position. I don't really know how Nihal blundered this. This is out of my comprehension. Yeah, this was just a bad day for Nihal, I think. So because the move after bishop b1 is, can you see the move? Can you see the winning move for black here? It's pawn to f4. So the idea is after for example, if you take king d4, and the extra pawn really does not matter here. What matters is the king will come to b2, take on a2, king b2, and the a pawn will queen. You might have one or two extra pawns on the other side. They do not matter at all. And that's why Nihal played the move king e4, but this is too little, too late. Black has the check. Now he's forced to capture king d4, bishop e4, bishop d7, c5, and now e5. Very important. If black captures directly, now king e5, even white is winning this position now because this pawn will be attacked very soon. White will go f4, g5 and create a pass pawn. But Enrique, true to his style, plays the best move, e5. And after king g3, king c5, Nihal resigns in this position because he has absolutely no defense to the simple maneuver. King d4, king c3, king b2, takes, king b2, and queens. This was a tragic loss for Nihal because I think he should have easily drawn this. Even if Carlsen or even Stockfish was given this position, Nihal would literally draw this game 99 out of 100 times against Stockfish. So it was kind of a tragic loss for him, but we know how strong Nihal is. He can come back, and we hope that he comes back in an amazing way tomorrow. He will have the black pieces, of course, so he'll have to create some dynamic chances. He will be forced to put his opponent into pressure right from the opening. Enrique will know all he needs is a draw, but I think we can bet on Nihal to put up a great fight tomorrow. Maybe you thought that things cannot get better, but they can. And this is Prag's game against his opponent Michael Krasenko, and Prag is the higher seed here, which is kind of ironical because he faced a much stronger opponent in the last round. But here he starts with e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, and the Petrov. So black is clearly going for the draw here. Knight takes e5, d6, knight f3, knight e4, bishop d3, a very interesting weapon against the Petrov. Knight f6, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, castles, bishop f1, and white is simply developing his pieces. Now this position is not really that advantageous for white, but of course Prag is going to try and outplay his opponent. So rook e8, d4, c6, c4, knight d7, knight c3, and white has more space. I think black would have played the opening a bit better, but he has allowed white to take the center, and now it's not so easy for black to develop all his pieces. So knight f8, h3, d5, and queen b3. So white is ready to take the isolated pawn, but he'll be like, okay, I'll capture with the bishop, I'll have a development advantage, I'll have more space, I'll move my bishop to g5 or f4, and I'll try to attack you in some way. So queen b6, c takes, queen takes, a takes, knight takes, takes, and we have come to an endgame where you have a symmetrical structure. White has the open A file, that's his plus, and his pawns are doubled, so technically they are a bit weak in quotes for the endgame. And as no side has any other CS advantage, I think this is roughly equal. But because black is not fully developed yet, if black had already played a couple of moves like bishop e6 and maybe knight d7, then it would be just completely equal. But because black is not fully developed, I would say white should be slightly better here. Maybe there were better moves here because ideally exchanging the bishop on c8 for the bishop on f1 is not really something which is the best strategically, but I think Prag had an idea in mind. Takes, and now rook a5. So he exchanged the bishop, which can defend the pawn on e6, and he uses this tempo to kind of double up his rooks. After knight f6, bishop to g5, and you can see what his plan is. Now it's more obvious. He wants to take here and take on d5, as simple as that. So king f8, rook b5, b6, rook a1. Now just to keep in mind, if you, for example, immediately capture, and rook takes d5, black unfortunately has a lot of play. For example, knight takes here, and now you can see white's pieces do not look that great. Simply king e7, and I don't know how white will hold all his positions. King e6 is coming up, and then the d4 pawn will be hanging. So this is not really what white is hoping for. He's hoping for more, and that's why he plays rook a1, h6, and now he captures. So now bishop f6, and now rook a4. So defending the d4 pawn first, and after rook c8, g4, king e7, rook takes d5, rook c2. Even now, the position is not really that better for white, I would say, because of his broken pawn structure, as well as possibly a weak pawn on d4. And after h4, g6, rook b5, rook takes b2, g5, takes. After bishop g7, you can see white has gained a lot of space on the king side. This position should still be equal. Black has managed to win back his pawn, and but somehow you can feel that Pragnanda is playing confidently. He has pushed his pawn all the way to g5, and he's still hoping for something in this position. He'll move his king up the board, and then he'll try to attack these pawns. You can see rook takes b6 can be a threat sometimes. Right now it's not so because b3 is also hanging. King g2, f6, so black is trying to break this bind, and now d5. Interesting idea. Also, maybe rook takes b6 was possible here, because now after a takes b6, rook takes a8, rook takes b3, rook a7. Somehow the black pieces are misplaced. But I think even what he played, d5, king d6, rook c4, trying to get the rooks up into black's king. And you can see white's rooks are very well connected. They're supporting each other. Even this pawn and even the knight can sometimes get in the game. But black's pieces, they're all kind of not coordinating well. The one is on this corner, one is on this corner, one is on this corner. I'm sure if they have walkie-talkie, they probably will be able to communicate, but I really doubt it as of now. So now after rook f8, rook c6, king d7, rook b4, and you can see white is kind of trying to bring all his pieces into the game. F takes g5, a move I really don't like. After rook a4, a5, you can see everything is falling apart. Rook takes b6, bishop c3, rook c4, g4, a final try, but rook takes g4, g5, rook c4 back, g4, rook takes g4 again, and black is giving up pawns like they mean nothing. After rook b1, rook g6, bishop a1, move played because black is literally almost in zugzwang. He cannot play anything here. He wants to keep the bishop on this diagonal to prevent rook g7, but he also wants to attack this pawn, and there's nothing else he can do in the position. So after rook b7 check, king c8, rook b5, bishop f6, knight d2, and white is bringing the knight into the game with ayas e4 or c4, and that's why black simply resigned. And Prag's play was so convincing, because when you look at this position, it looks like there's absolutely nothing in this position. It should end in a draw in like 5 moves from now. But then suddenly within around 7 to 8 moves, his opponent resigns, and that tells you how great his endgame skills are, and that will definitely help him, because whenever you're playing the endgames, that's where your time is low on the clock, and if you can play a better endgame, you'll probably end up making the better decisions. So that's why Prag has moved on with a lead of 1-0 against Krasenko, and that means he's also favored to move on to the next round. Meanwhile, in the other games of the open section, Carlsen managed to win against his countryman Aren Tariq. Danny Dubov crushed Vladimir Malakhov with the white pieces, as you can see in this position. And now if you move on to the women's section, Harika is the only female player for India remaining in the competition, and she lost her first game to Valentina Gunina. And as you can see, the final position itself displays a tail, and she will have to come back tomorrow and try to win this game. Let's hope she shows a great comeback tomorrow and defeats her opponent, so that she can move on to the tie breaks and try to move on to the next round. These were the games for round 3 day 1, and that means most of the Indians have won. Nihal and Harika have lost, but I think we know both of these players are really strong, especially Harika is clearly the higher seed, so we can bank on her to come back with the white pieces tomorrow. As for Nihal, he was just really unlucky, losing his concentration for just one move, and I think he will obviously be fighting tomorrow to win the game. So let's hope all of these guys qualify for round 4, and we'll know all of that tomorrow. So till then, take care and keep smiling as always. How can we forget Anish Giri? He drew his game against Abdusattarov, the guy who defeated Firuzja in the previous round. So he will also try to win with the white pieces tomorrow.